Hi gang, this is Denise and this is Ask Denise, and Susan has asked me a question. Well, it's maybe more of a comment. She says she lacks the ability to externally rotate at the hip to get into lotus pose. So this is lotus pose. A lot of times in class we use half lotus, but you can still see it. It requires external rotation at the hip. So if you're working toward that, you can work with the pose itself by bolstering under your hips. That's helpful. But if you want to do more than that, then here's what you do, Susan. Now, something like this could be what we call structural. So that means that the hip socket itself, either the direction it's pointed, maybe it's more downwardly pointed, like this cavity is downward, or it could be sometimes with retroverted femur. So if the head of the femur points this way, you're going to get a lot of external rotation. If it points that way, which many women have actually, then you get limited external rotation. External rotation at the hip would look like that. You see how the ball is rotating externally? Okay, so that could be structural. So it could just be the bony shape, but it could be functional. And that means that it's just soft tissue. So that could be, we can work with soft tissue to increase her range of motion. And with Susan, I think it's probably functional, it's probably soft tissue, because she has been a runner for many, many years. And of course, running does not require a lot of range of motion at the hip. It certainly doesn't require external hip rotation, right? So you've got a really strong reinforced pattern, reinforced muscle, reinforced connective tissue for that very sort of, fairly limited range of motion. So Susan, here's where you should start. I think, right, first of all, let's just soften everything up. Okay, so lateral hip rotators in this area here, want to go there with the ball. I would start you against the wall myself. Lean yourself into it, and you're going to find lots of juicy sensation here that you're going to find it's going to really benefit you to work with the ball. That's going to ease that up quite a bit for you. You literally don't have to work with a particular pattern. You're just looking for tenderness, looking for places where you can feel that, oh yeah, that's what I need. That's what you want to feel there. Then you can take it into the side of the hip. You can do this on the floor too, but the wall gives you a bit more control. And you can just work with the body, working across. Some of those are hip flexors as well. And then we're going to work with your psoas, so putting the ball inside this hip bone. I guess Pinjar can help us with that too. So you want to kind of work through this tunnel right here. And that's what I'm doing as I lie myself on the ball. And I can work with my breath, so pushing it out with my abdomen, softening onto the tissue. I usually work with knee flexion and extension, windshield wipering, and then hip extension, whatever you're able to tolerate. So some of those things, so you're working around your hip all the way around, from the back side to the inner aspect with the ball. And then you're going to work with isometric contraction and mobilization. So mobilization is just simple windshield wiper legs to warm up. Even doing this leg shaking, that kind of thing is good mobilization for the hip. And then you're going to do isometric strengthening. So things like squats. You can do squats against the wall if you like. They can be wide squats. Eventually you'll work with single leg squats. So this is going to help you start to develop more range of motion at the hip. You're actually going to need to do some abduction. So standing abduction with leg out, or you can work with a hand on the floor. I guess you could work with the knee. So abducted positions where you're actively abducting. And then, of course, we could bring in good old pigeon pose, but we need to do it actively. So as though you're going to lift yourself out of the position. Want to be really active here. And then we can work with Baddha Konasana at various angles. So actively pressing down toward the floor. You can bring it in narrower and then press your legs into your hands. And then you'll find once you get the joint all heated up, you're going to go into lotus or half lotus a heck of a lot easier if it's appropriate for you. So what I want to caution you about, Susan, please don't ask your knee to make up for a range of motion you're missing at your hip, okay? Please, please, please don't do that. Put something under your sitting bones. Work on strengthening and opening and heating up your hip before you do any movement like that, before you go into those deep positions. Make sure you're developing the tolerance for your hip to go into that position before you start to really leverage and stretch it. Remember, leverage is when you're, there's nothing more leveraged in yoga than lotus pose. Okay, that is one bone using another bone to literally lock yourself into a position. So that is a very compromised position if your hip's not ready for it. So please work your way up to it. All right, thanks for asking the question, and I hope that's helpful for you, Susan. Feel free to ask more questions if you need. Thanks for joining me, guys. Bye for now.